Hi, I'm Kent.
And I'm Anna.
We're married, we make movies, and we believe that anyone in any circumstance can make a feature film.
Welcome to the Feature Filmmaker Podcast. If you want a career making movies, you're in the right place.
Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in. All right, welcome to the podcast. We have Kiel, and Adam Bova is back on. Kiel, what's your last name? I should know your last name.
It's Thorlton, so it's Irish like Tarleton. It's Thorlton.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to try and say that and mess it up, but
Thorlton?
Thorlton?
Yeah, there you go.
Thorlton.
Yeah, you got it.
All right.
Okay, and he is director of A Place Called Home, and we've got Adam Bova back on. He has been on the podcast before talking about the film, and now I believe it's available in theaters and or streaming. And I mean, let us know how we can watch it. We're gonna kind of touch base again. And
yeah, it's available now on pretty much every single streaming platform except Netflix, because it is a rental at the moment. $3.99.
Yeah, it depends on the platform, but it's purchased usually.
So you can see it on Amazon, Apple TV, Vudu. I know I'm missing like a half dozen.
A lot of satellite things are available too, and if you're like me and actually like physical hard copies, you can buy DVDs of it too. It's a Walmart, Best Buy, and Barnes and Noble, I think, are the three.
I'm a huge believer and proponent of physical media.
yeah,
I still think it looks better than streaming.
Yes.
I think it sounds better than streaming. I don't know what happens to sound. No matter how good your internet is, I love Blu-rays. I like Criterion Collection movies.
Yes.
I like all that stuff. So.
And then there are conversation pieces on a bookshelf when people come over. It's like looking at books, right?
You get to know people.
That's true.
I'm not like, can you turn on your subscriptions and can I look at your watch history?
I want to know what your taste in comedy is.
No, that's good. I actually watched the film today, and I really loved it. It was great. So
thanks.
You guys have a lot to be proud of.
Well,
good work.
Did you cry?
I got really close. I did get emotional. I was taking care of my own babies while I watched it some of the time, so that added to the experience.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
we had, I mean, I've had a bunch of people that have told me like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect it to be whatever. But the baby in the film is now like a toddler. She's 3 now. And her mom had not had a chance to see the movie. So she sat down and watched the movie. And at some point throughout the movie, the 3-year-old woke up. And it was like this really surreal experience of like seeing her baby in this movie and then her baby in real life now being 3, which was really cool.
Wow, that is cool.
We were just working on the edit of our film, and our 3-year-old was sitting on Anna's lap and was like, "Oh, that's me, but the baby, but the baby me." Like it was like this weird like self-realization and everything. And so, yeah, honestly, like I've been reviewing our edit as we're locking in, and just this last couple of days, and then I was watching your guys' film, and I was like, oh, this is about as much like intense domestic drama as I can take in one day. Like, I don't know if I can keep like, cause it got real intense, and I was like, oh shoot, like I don't know if I can handle this right now.
Very similar premise.
You can't watch them every day. You gotta pace yourself.
Yeah,
but they leave you feeling more whole. You know, there's a difference between wholesomeness and sort of sterileness. And this, I felt like this was a film that actually wanted to do something for someone, to do something for the audience. It's actually serving them in a way that I think sometimes our films are like giving us what we want, but not actually doing anything good for us. You know what I mean? Yeah. So no, that's something.
From pretty early on, we talked about like we hoped that by the end of it, at least made you go and hug your family maybe a second time, right?
Right.
On those like if you, especially you have kids and you're putting them to bed, or you have a significant other and you do the good night or whatever, you're like, you know what, I'm gonna take the extra second and do the extra hug just in case, because unfortunately life is fleeting. You never know.
Yeah. So Kiel, you wrote this as well as directed it. Yeah. Where did this story come from? Is this based in any personal experiences, or is this what made you write it?
Kind of. It was really macabre while I was writing it. So I started writing it while I was still in film school and I was working full time. So I was writing in the evenings, and I started writing it really shortly after my second daughter was born. And so it became really macabre because a lot of times, I'm sure you guys have experienced this too. People will say, oh, well, write what you know. And I think as filmmakers, sometimes we take that really like to the letter and just go, oh, my life is a movie then. And I'll just write my life. And that's not always the case, right? So I wanted to incorporate a few things that I felt like I really did know intrinsically, which is growing up in the South and being a dad, growing up in the rural South and being a dad. And so then I mixed those together. And my second daughter had just been born when I initially got the idea. And we played around with a few drafts. There was a draft where the mother made it and the baby didn't for a little while, which would have been a very different movie.
Yeah.
And then I went through like maybe draft 1 or 2. And then it was one night, it was really late. And I woke up. This is gonna sound super cliche, but I really did. I woke up out of a dream. It was like 2:30 in the morning. I went downstairs. I'm just typing away. My wife wakes up. She's like, "What are you doing?" Like, I have an idea. I know where it needs to go. So some of it was absolutely my experiences. And Levi really is, there's some of me in there. There's some of a lot of other people I know, other people that were in the area that I grew up with, and kind of melded together into this person. And then it just started really exploring that family dynamic. I love exploring family dynamics. Families are so unique. They're so different all across the world. And I really like sitting down and just kind of picking those apart. And what would happen if this and this and this and this and this? And then the further that it got in the process, the harder it became to write, because I had to start pulling from personal experiences of, what would I do? Like, how would I go to sleep at night? That's a really big theme of the film, is going to sleep at night. Well, if you're used to having somebody with you, what is that like now? Because it seems like something very simple, but it's really not. It's really complicated. So it was a combination of a few different things mixed with a few things that I felt like I really knew, and then enough separation to say it's a story, right? So I'm not Levi by any means,
Right.
because I don't think that would have worked well for my mental health. But it was, separated enough that I could look at it and go, this is the story through these lenses that I'm putting in front of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver, talks about the metaphor being close enough that there's a spark. If it's on top, if the positive and negative are on top of each other, it won't work. And if they're too far away from each other, but you've got to get it just close enough that he's like, I basically just put my angsty 20-something-year-old in a taxi in New York City and like just wrote the most just self-destructive version of myself. And then I was able to like walk away from it, and not live that out. But not that that's exactly what you did, but it's an interesting approach. I wonder. So I feel like you were really going for a sense of like authentic portrayal of domesticity with Levi and his daughters and some other familial relationships that were in the movie. Did you do any preparation in terms of? Because I've had an experience of depicting in a short. It was really a homework assignment. Someone losing their spouse. Mm-hmm. And I actually showed it in a class, and that professor had lost his spouse to cancer, which was like made me really question my smartness in terms of selection of material. And I was like, wow, that was stupid. But he immediately called me out and just said like, oh, the actor missed the mark here. Like that either wasn't the take, or that wasn't the right direction, or it just wasn't the right performance. But like someone who got this news in this moment would not respond exactly in this way. And it was when he said that I was like, oh yeah, he would know.
Yeah.
I mean, did you do any like talking to people, or did you just kind of take it from like what do I think I would experience or do?
No, I did a lot of conversations with people, and what I tried to do, so there were a couple key stories that I didn't talk to these people directly, but that I knew about that went through something similar, and I found news articles, stuff where they had maybe written about. I read a couple books on, losing loved ones, especially like losing spouses when you have children and things like that. But I had a couple conversations which were really interesting about people who had lost spouses and were removed from it 20 years, 15 years removed on it, and reflecting back on what that scenario was, right? What were the things that stuck out to them? Because if you take somebody that's really fresh in the moment, they're going to say everything is important, right? You take somebody that's 20, 30 years, they're like, this was important, and this was important, and this was important. And after I had those conversations, one of the big changes that was made, I think on draft 3 going into 4, draft 4 was kind of the first like blueprint of like, this is it, right? And then everything else past that was just tweaks. But the big change going from 3 to 4 was to put the space, the gap of time between the loss of the mother and where we pick back up in the story, because a few months have passed. in between as soon as she's gone and there. And that was for a couple reasons, but the really biggest one being that everyone's experience that I had talked to or read about were wildly different in those first like 2 to 3 months. And I didn't want somebody to look at that maybe would connect to this story and go, that's not true because that's not my experience. And because it's so traumatic, they feel like that experience is everyone's experience. So by separating it a little bit, that couple month time frame, once we pick back up in the story, we don't have to deal with the messy fallout of the initial, right? So we can kind of save some of that emotional stuff for later. And then it can be Levi's experience. And it's that recovery experience of just getting used to life moving on. And although this wasn't during the film, I had talked to somebody, we've now moved and we live in another state. And while we've been there, there's a person that we know that her husband just all of a sudden passed away. And she has a teenager, a preteen, and like a 10-year-old, somewhere in that realm. And talked to her about the movie. And she's like, I can't watch it. Da 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 da. That's not, because it's really fresh for her. But I was explaining some of the things that kind of happened in the movie. She's like, we can talk about it, but like, I don't want to watch it. And somebody brought it up to her, like, you should see this thing. She was like, I don't want to watch this thing.
Right.
From her being really fresh, she's like, I think that the things that you are nailing are accurate to what's happening, because she was living in that moment that like 2 to 3 months after it has happened. And it's just understanding that life moves on. You got to get back in that rhythm. You got to figure out, you probably dealt with some stuff, but there's some things that you're not dealing with yet. Right. And they were approaching going into Thanksgiving. Then all of a sudden, the first Thanksgiving where dad's not there. What do you do? How do your kids react to that? How do you react to that? So yeah, I did a good amount of research. I'm still very interested to hear what other people's opinions on it are, because I'd like to know, how close was it to the mark? How far away was it? What did you feel about it? Especially somebody who has dealt with something very similar to this.
Yeah. I think you handled it really well. I mean, not being someone who's experienced it, but
it's evident that you did your homework.
Yeah. I mean, I related to it. I think even just the idea of like raising young kids and financial difficulties, I actually think is something that so many people experience. And our film's about that. It's a young family, financial crisis, very similar. So it's interesting to watch yours. And I was like, wow, we must have a lot in common with Kyle. But I think that experience is common. It's something a lot of people can relate to, but we don't see it portrayed in film.
Well, I think it's also common to our generation. And, we're starting to see that generation of millennial filmmakers get into positions where we can make films about us, for us. And you're seeing, just a whole new side, I think, of storytelling, just from everything that we've experienced and we've had to go through. So
that's so. I have a really follow-up question. I don't know.
No, go ahead.
So we had a professor of ours. I'll just say this openly, in full transparency. One of our professors straight up said that she hated it, our movie. Not yours.
Really?
Yes. And that's just to your point, Adam, about this millennial like depiction of parenthood. And I just got this sense that this was a woman who was like, look, I've been through divorce. I've been through like raising kids alone. I mean, she's been through so much more than I mean, I have so much respect for this woman's opinion of our film, because she's watching this mom have a hard time and she's like, suck it up, It's like, and so her perspective is like this, about a generation up, more advanced. And she's been through some stuff where it's like, oh, it's hard to listen to kids cry. It's like, nah, yeah, okay, like whatever. And so I think that, I don't know if it's just what has your guys' experience been with your film in terms of audiences that are, and your film is, I think, more deeply situated in like Kentucky, the South. There's like a very rural lifestyle in the sense that like incomes are really low, but so are, I mean, relatively speaking, so are expenses. Like the numbers they even throw around in the movie, I feel like they talk numbers where it's like, yeah, he doesn't live in downtown Atlanta. He's not living in New York City. You know what I mean? Like it's very evident that it's like, oh yeah, like what's your mortgage? $900 a month, and it's like, it's just a different way of life. So I'm just wondering, how did this film resonate with, if you guys have, been privy with older audiences?
Well, I did hear back from some of them. It's funny that you say 900 a month, because when we filmed this, inflation has happened, right? It's continuing to happen. That 900 a month is definitely not 900 a month anymore, right? If we filmed it
Just to
today,
remind your audience, we did film this in 2019, before the pandemic, before the housing just like blew up all over the place. That wasn't even a blip on our radar at that point. So
Yeah. It's become people's reality even more though, even though the numbers might sound silly.
Yeah. And we've had some other people that have shared stuff, you know, about the financial difficulty that feels like it's in this film because it's so much more evident and in our society now that it's everything is more expensive. I'm raising kids. Let me tell you, that grocery bill, man, is a tough pill to swallow when you're, you know, so it's all these things. So I think part of that is really captivating in this particular story is that it is challenging, right? Our lead, Ben Gavin, he laughed once he got partway through the film, he kind of gets some of his money situations resolved for a second. And the first thing he does is buy pizza. And he's like, why would this guy do that? I'm like, because he just wants to love somebody. And he's like, it's just pizza. It's not a big deal. But now, you know, you go out to eat a couple times, it's kind of a deal and, you know, breaks the budget. But the response that I have heard, obviously I haven't heard from everybody, but I have heard from a couple of people who are a generation or two past us, have been positive and connected with it. And part of that could be because it's that lens of the South. I wanted to put a lens of it on there because I wanted to, not only am I, you know, connected to the South, but it gives a little bit of style and a little bit of flair that can add on to that, because you don't see a lot of films set in the rural South. They do exist, but you don't see that many, right? But specifically, I had a couple that are, you know, two and a half generations past me that watched it, both loved it. And these two people have dealt with losing some of their family members and then raising their grandchildren. And for them to then go, I loved it, you know, for the wife to be like, I cried my eyes out, I couldn't stop, you know, that to me obviously makes you feel good because you did what you wanted to do, right?
Yeah.
But like that was really good and positive reaffirmation of, you know, what we were trying to do. And I can remember a couple different conversations that I overheard at a film festival. I can think of three at three different film festivals where it was somebody who was a good maybe 15, 20 years older than I, that were, you know, she obviously was kind of cleaning herself up and they're having a conversation about, you know, what do we, you know, this was so good. What would we do if we, you know, lost each other? Obviously they're a little bit more moved on, but they still connected to it. So far I've heard that. I mean, I'm sure the only negative one that I've heard from somebody who's a little bit more removed from us is that somebody was like, I can't believe how much language was in it. And I don't feel like there's that much language, but there definitely is some. I mean, it's meant to be an adult film. And we tried to market it and sell it in such a way, letting people know, hey, this is, you know, it's got the morality that you probably are looking for, but it's wrapped in a package of being very serious and very adult. It's not a Hallmark movie, right? It's an adult Hallmark movie. So I think that's probably the one that I've heard most recently was like, I can't believe the language. But that was probably it.
You can't please
You
everyone.
should recommend Hacksaw Ridge to them for their next.
Yes, perfect. Great idea. Oh, you're right. I think you hit it on the head, especially when you're talking about your film, is that any filmmaker going into this, you have to know you will not please everyone.
Yeah.
Period. It will not happen. You're probably not going to please 75%. I think if you please 60, you're doing something right, because not everybody's going to be into your thing. Not everybody liked, pick your favorite movie you saw in the last 2 to 3 years. Not everyone liked that. There's probably people you know that don't like that movie. I don't want to watch that.
Right.
You know?
I've almost found that like anything above 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, I don't like anymore. And it's like the ones that are in like the 70s now are starting to be my prime spot.
The ones that are so controversial.
It's like they're
you
just
love it or hate
they're personal enough and they're artistic enough that there's people that are like, this rubbed me wrong. It's like because it had to elicit an emotional response, and it wasn't this perfectly calculated movie made by a committee coming out of like Marvel Studios or something, where it's like, oh, well, what's there to not like? It's like, exactly, which is like, what's there to work with, you know? Like, it's like there's nothing to dislike, so it's this perfect like wholesome thing, but it's not even wholesome. I would say sanitized is the problem. And so that's my experience with the script, man, that I've been trying to write for a little bit now, and I finally just had to come to the conclusion everyone but me is going to hate this film. That's the only thing I could do to like get myself into a headspace where I was just like, I've just got to let go of it. Like everyone but me is going to hate it, and I'm going to write it anyway. I'm gonna make it anyway, and in the end, someone's gonna thank me for it. Someone.
It's a
Right.
tricky
You know,
balance. It's a tricky balance. I think you have to make something that you want to see, like that you legitimately like, and
Yeah.
tell me your thoughts too, Kyle and Adam. But I also think you have to balance that. We've done rigorous testing with ours. I don't know if you guys did any like of that process, and we had to, get to a point where it's like, all right, it's averaging pretty good.
our
And,
Yeah.
no one's ever gonna be like all tens all around, but
our first test screening audience was an audience of one, who happened to be Adam. And
That's true. That was our very first
I
test
think it got a
screening.
pretty low score.
Yeah.
It probably, needed a low score. It was a totally different film, but
Yeah, I think Kyle's right. You can't focus on, you got to put it out there that you're only going to please, 60 to 70% of the audience. And then you have to stop worrying about that 30%. They're not important. There's going to be somebody out there who's willing to buy your idea, who's going to be willing to put money behind it. You just have to keep on looking for that person. You just have to keep on knocking on doors. You just have to keep on pushing it. You will find your 60%. You just got to keep looking for it. And I think that's the important thing to kind of remember as, you're a filmmaker going through this, whether you're writing or you're, actually in production or in test screenings. I think you guys said it. You have to write what you want, and you have to create what you want to see, and you will find that there are others out there that are wanting to see that same thing.
yeah.
I'm trying to remember the movie. It was like I listened to an interview with the producer of Alien. I think it was. I think it was Alien, and they tested it up in like Minnesota or something, and it just bombed. It bombed
Yeah.
so bad in the test screening that like all the producers were like on the plane, and they were like, "What are we gonna do? All right, let's start looking at scenes that we're gonna have to chop. Like it's just gonna be a flop. Like we thought we had something here. Like we thought it was really good." And then they went to Texas and screened it, and it was like a raging success. Like people were just losing their minds in the theaters. People were screaming. People were shouting, and like it was just like a smash. And they were just like, "Oh, maybe it's not so bad." Like it's just like, and it's like it's the same movie, and you just get this group of people together, and
Yeah.
it's just it's a funny thing. And maybe it was the weather
David,
that day. It's just you don't know.
yeah, David Sandberg, which is the Shazam director,
Yeah,
and like now he has a really good, it's like 8 to 10 minute YouTube video that he's animated about test screenings and
yeah,
screening audiences, and it's so well thought out. I mean, obviously he's coming from a more robust budget area, right, dealing with
Mhm.
DC and things like that. But I think so much of it is true that you're right. Depends on the weather, and if you're doing test screenings with people online, it's okay. Did they have their phone out? Did somebody do they have kids? Did somebody wake up halfway through and they had to go and deal with that? And they come back and go, oh, wait, where was I? Did they watch it Monday morning before to work, or did they sit down, grab popcorn, turn the lights off, and watch it with their spouse? Because those screening experiences are wildly different. But we absolutely did some screenings. They were all online because we were doing it in the midst of COVID. So we did not get a face-to-face screening. So many of the things that we got, we just missed out on face-to-face. But what we were really looking for is patterns. Right? We were just looking for those pattern moments. Was this an issue? Was this an issue? And there were a few that were patterns that nothing egregious, but like, I would like some more clarity on this. Oh, 11 other people said this exact same thing from the screening. Okay, there might be something here.
Yeah.
And taking some of that into account as much as we could for the film. And I think it did make it better ultimately, but it didn't change a lot. It changed some small things, but it didn't change like massive waves of things like I'm
what
sure
the film is.
Yeah, right. It is what it
Yeah.
is, right? We're not dealing with, I can't go back and do reshoots, right? We're an independent, small production on an ultra low budget scale. It is what it is at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
the scary part is eventually you have to just go, all right, y'all watch it. And I can't touch it ever again. And I'm at
Yeah.
that point now where we can never touch it again. It's done. It's out
Yeah.
there.
How long has it been, the whole process from start to end?
I started writing, well, my daughter was born and she's 6 now. So there you go.
Okay.
So that was the writing process.
Yeah.
The writing process took a little bit of time. And
Mhm.
then I hate talking about COVID, but COVID did slow us down because that was all in our post-production. We did at one point, I'm so thankful we didn't, but at one point we really talked about shooting the summer of 2020 to have an extra, year to get our pre-production done.
Mm.
That would have been height of COVID. So I'm very glad we didn't, because then
Yeah.
that would have pushed even further beyond. So, but I mean, yeah, I started writing when she was born, so it's been about 6 years now at this
Yeah.
point.
Wow.
So for filmmakers like us, we're like, especially these initial films, this is your first feature film, right, Kyle?
Yep. Yeah.
Well, it takes a long time to get these movies made, man. It's like I like listen to Ryan Johnson of
Yeah.
The Last Jedi, Knives Out, yada yada, and his lifelong DP, Steve Yedlin. They were best friends in college, and they've worked together on every film. Steve Yedlin talks about like, you go to school and you're like a DP, you go to LA and you just start shooting movies. You just start picking up gigs and you just hop on projects. And he says, and then like 6 years, your friend who graduated as a director is like, hey, I'm gonna make my first thing. Like, it's
Yep.
like, I'm gonna make this movie. And he's like at that point, he's like, I was like commanding like a decent day rate as a DP, but it's like his best friend. So his producer's like, wait, this guy said he'll do this movie for you for like $100 a day. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, do it, man. Like, and,
Yeah.
and so like, for so many people, actors, DPs, why it just takes a ton of commitment, I think, for directors to be like, I don't really it's not like, oh, I'll make my passion project in 3 months because I'll just take this one for the money. It's like, I'm going to make a film and I'm just going to have to say, you basically have to say, I'll just work on this for as long as it takes until it exists,
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
why did you do this one? Why did you tell this story? And you probably had a shelf of ideas, I'm assuming.
Sure, but this one really stuck out because when I was writing it, I wanted to write a story that I felt like could be done if we had nothing, if we had no resources, right? And so the story that I wrote was that story. It was A Place Called Home, which could have been done for nothing. It would have taken longer. It wouldn't have been as good. I wouldn't have got to make some of the contact. We wouldn't have gotten probably any of our amazing cast. And so that was where it came from, was that necessity of nothing. We got a little bit to be able to do something with it, but I just made a really big, I'm kind of coming to the consensus that I realized this chapter is now closing in my life. And I made a really big post, and I was thinking, through conversations I had early on and there was one in particular that was me, it was Adam, our other producer, Nathan Bannister, and our director of photography, Aaron Barbusic. And early on, we all sat down and went, this is going to be a marathon. And it really has been. It's been even longer than I thought it would be. And there's so many projects that go through it that maybe they do get done and then they don't know where to go from there. Or maybe they go through a few festivals and they're like, well, crap, what do I do now? And we just made a commitment early on that we were going to go, okay, look, if we want to make other things, and we've got to prove that we can take this one through the ringer, you got to pay your dues, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, in this particular story, it rings true to so many things that I believe there is a really big emphasis that we can put on family, whatever family looks like to you. And family looks very different to everybody else, right? And I think that that's the most intrinsically important thing to humanity is our family, right? How we grow up, what we're raised with, things like that. And I wanted to tell that story. And then the fact that I could film it, because we filmed it in my hometown, and I grew up in an area that, my hometown, I remember getting our first stoplight when I was 16. It's the only stoplight that's still in that town.
Wow.
Right? So that to me was really important, to be able to put that lens on my first project where I realized that I wanted to make movies. Did I think it was going to take 6 years? No, I really thought it was going to be like a 2 to 3 process, but it's just not the case. I don't have, we don't have a huge studio backing us. We don't have a huge PR team backing us, anything like that. So it's got to be us. We have to hustle for it. If I opened up a business today, it's not going to make money in a year, right?
Right.
It's going to take time to get that stuff going.
I mean, even after we got done with most of our film festivals were in 2022, right?
Yes.
Kyle? Yeah. So most of our film festivals were in 2022.
Welcome to 2023, by the way, everybody.
Yeah. Yes. Woo! New Year. But I mean, I can remember, Kyle and I are both professors at college. So for this last spring and fall semester, we've been trading emails back and forth, and I've been working on getting contracts all together and making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. and that people actually signed them. Those of you who are currently in production that may be listening to this, those signatures at the bottom do matter. So make sure you get those. Just going through all this list of stuff that the distributor needs in order to legally be able to distribute this film. And it wasn't until October, November that we finally got like everything done and turned in.
I think it was early November.
Yeah.
It was before Thanksgiving for sure.
Yeah, but just barely.
Now, I've heard that from a lot of people that can be a beast. What happens if you don't have something?
Well, it depends on what that something is. I would, imagine if it's, how big of an effect is it going to have? Is it your lead never signed their contract? Okay, well, that might be a deal breaker, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's something that you have to go back and get. I remember one thing that I had to go back and get from somebody else that we had the written agreement, but we just didn't have the thing signed, right? And so much of it is just making sure that you have all your ducks in a row. If you don't have something, it's going to depend on how important that something is.
Like, darn it, I didn't keep the receipt for that lamp, and now
right.
now we can't sell it.
Well,
obviously something like that's not a big deal, but
you listen to like someone like Australian commercial director Mark Toya, who talked about making his little movie for like $1 million of his own money. And he says, something that's not going to break the bank, make us lose sleep. And I was like, oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah. But he talks about like these YouTubers making great content out there, and they're making like some really impressive stuff. And there are people out there that are making like remarkable looking, sounding, well produced, high end stuff, and they're throwing it on YouTube, and just to command like audience, just to pull an audience and sponsorship. And he's like, and then you go and you make this movie for like $1 million. You put your heart and soul into it. So you go throw it, and like some German distributor is like, well, there's a dead pixel at this time code. The AI found it. And he's just like, who cares? Like, I just don't. Have you experienced anything like that where your distributor's like, oh, I need this thing, and you're just like, look, if you need that, you just forget it. Like, have you run into anything like that?
Nothing quite like that. You had. Oh gosh, how many exports did you wind up going through?
Oh man. So we did have to go through quality check. So there's a tertiary company that does a quality check to make sure everything's good. So that way when Apple gets it or whatever, it goes where it needs to go. And we had some sound issues that somewhere along the lines, we had to go through all the quality check stuff. And at some point along the lines, and I'm sure that I did it, we messed up our audio somewhere and I didn't notice it. And so I had to go back to our sound designer, who is an amazing sound designer off the East Coast, Randy Field, who just had the original stems, went back and redid it. But there was one that was kind of funny, and it reminded me of Jurassic Park, because there's kind of a famous thing in Jurassic Park with a velociraptor. But there's a moment in the film where there's a visual effect of a corn combine. And for some reason, it just disappears for a frame and then comes right back in. And we didn't notice it, right? And so that we had to go back and we had to fix it. It wasn't okay to let that go through. In Jurassic Park, there's a scene where the Tyrannosaurus Rex is eating Velociraptor. And the very first export of the film that went to the theaters, the Velociraptor just disappears for a frame. Nobody knows why. They've fixed it since. But so there was like that, where it's like, hey, if the quality check company says this has to be fixed, then this has to be fixed. Yeah. Sound was a big issue. The combine, probably not a huge issue, but obviously we had to go back and then fix that.
And otherwise, how has the process of distribution been for you? Do you feel like it's going to make its money back, or it has made its money back, or what's that been like?
Adam and I just both had very different responses. I don't know. That's such a great question, because there's so much content out there. We've made what I feel like on this side of it is a very, very good drama that doesn't have a household name in it. And that's just the fact of it, right? We have some incredible actors in there that some people do know. Some people do know Ben, some people do know Sean, some people do know Paul. Like, there are some names in there, but there's not somebody that my mom would just recognize off the top of her head. Right. And so that's just the reality of it. I'm hopeful that it will, but even if it does, it's gonna be a marathon again, right? It's not gonna be in 6 months. Right. It might be in 6 years that process happens.
But I think
Yeah.
the important thing is, getting it out there. We are currently, for rental or for purchase right now, which is kind of the first phase of distribution post COVID. Our distribution company didn't even not purchase, but they didn't even want to acquire our theatrical rights. They left those with us because they're like, it's just way too expensive for us, the distribution company, to try to get your film into theaters. Theaters are charging so much money nowadays to get a film to, screen for even one night. So we still have those theatrical rights, but you go through that rental process and you hope that you start generating some buzz, you start getting people to download it, it starts to take off on a life of its own. I have noticed we have moved up Amazon's ranking. When you type in A Place Called Home, we are slowly creeping up that search result. So you go through that so that you can then do the SVOD, you can do the subscription, the Netflixes, Amazon Prime, Hulu, those places. You're trying to generate buzz so that you can get a better deal out of the subscription services. And, that's a game that's probably going to take years. We'll probably sign a exclusive contract, hopefully, with one subscription service. After the terms of that contract expire, we'll go back to other subscription services and see if somebody else wants to, play the game next. And then after that, you kind of go into AVOD, which is advertising supported video on demand. So your Pluto TV and all of that.
And everyone else now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Disney, everyone's ad supported now. I think even Netflix is thinking about ads now.
Everyone will be ad supported before the end of this year.
Yeah. Yay, 2023. So you do that, and then then you have all of your ancillary markets, your airlines, your hotels. I think somewhere along that line we'll try to do some overseas distribution. But again, thanks to the pandemic, thanks to streaming, even, European countries are not quite as interested in just the run-of-the-mill American films, because they're now seeing that they can develop their own country's film industry in their film culture in their native language, which I think is great. And, it's good, as Kyle has said, all families are unique. Each country and how they approach story is also unique. And
but you might find some interest in Europe because movies like Thunder Road did really well in France because of its Americana-ness. It was like almost a voyeuristic experience for the French to be like, wow, this is like an American cop, like dealing with like this like. But the movie was like a tragicomic, which is just such a genre that the French love. Like, it's sad, but it's funny at the same time. Like it's like and so you get like. You might actually find some interest there. I even think the movie would do well in Spanish-speaking countries, especially Latin American countries. Your film might have some interest there because of its rural sort of. That scene where he talks to that lone guy for the first time and talks about land, and I don't know. There's something about that I'm just like, no, I think that this like fight to like keep the family alive would really resonate with Hispanic people. This is talking to someone who's lived in Honduras for 2 years and lived in Chile. Like we have a lot of friends from Mexico.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, maybe. The pirating is a big problem, but you might be able to, make deals with like television networks and stuff. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
It's definitely a part of the conversation going forward of seeing where it can go. After this kind of initial push of what it's going to do. One of the cool markets that we've unlocked is, through the distributors, like libraries. And you don't think about that, but like my family goes to libraries like 3 times a week. No joke. Like we are always like at the library.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we love it too.
Yeah, and so it's unlocking some of those odd markets. There's a streaming service that universities get access to that we have called Canopy, Kanopy. So we have it where I work, and there's tons of incredible stuff on there. And so that's like another market to look at, is like educational markets. Adam brought that up, but like those educational markets are big streaming platform markets that are like their own little thing.
It's
and
such
libraries,
a
it's like selling DVDs to libraries or those
Well,
streaming.
and libraries also have streaming stuff because our library had access to it. My wife watched it. I was like, "You've watched it before?" She's like, "I know. I want to watch it again." Through a streaming platform that our library has access to. So it's it varies depending on the library itself. But some
Yeah,
of that,
I think they even put it on Hoopla, which a lot of libraries have access to.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
You know, it's interesting. But even DVDs, like there was a filmmaker from Texas who was just interviewed on the Indie Film Hustle podcast, and he talked about that. His biggest client was a distributor who said, "I just want your rights for library distribution," and he just put it on like every library in the United States now has his movie in it. And honestly, some of the best movies I've ever seen in my life were in film school and from the public library.
yeah,
Like
I mean,
it,
that's where I go and find my stuff.
they're way better than
Yeah,
any streaming service that I've ever found, ever.
they have
It's true.
everything.
Yeah.
Support your local libraries, kids.
Come
Yes.
on. Yeah.
Well, and go to your local libraries, filmmakers.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
if you want to see the best movies you've ever seen and be inspired, like, go to the foreign section
Hundreds.
and just like pick up random stuff. And like, man, I could just list the movies. They're just life-changing.
Well, I was going to
Like,
recommend Koreeda to you, Kyle, if you love family stories. He's a
Oh, yeah.
Japanese filmmaker who's always exploring, like, what does it mean to be a family and what does that look like? And
astonishing filmmaker.
he's amazing.
Roger
You'll
Ebert-
love his work, I think.
Roger Ebert said that he was one of the greatest living directors of our time. Like, one of the greatest
That's
living directors on the earth.
Koreeda.
Wow.
So
Koreeda.
Koreeda.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, I think you'll like that one.
Getting
Um,
recommendations.
If anyone is a longtime
Oh, okay,
listener of our
yeah.
podcast, they're going to be like really tired of
I
hearing
know,
us
they're like,
recommend
"Stop."
Koreeda to people. It's like, if that's the only thing I hear out of this podcast.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it is almost like you've purchased a property or you own an asset now, and you could sometimes just sell the whole thing outright, or you can
Mhm.
lease it out and you're not going to make back the cost of it immediately,
You're not
but
gonna make-
over time,
Yeah.
eventually you'll pay off the house and you can keep renting it out and you can build up your properties. And, you know, it's like real estate in a way, these
Right.
different assets.
Well, and realistically, in distribution now, I mean, any film at our level is not getting bought outright. It's just
No,
not. That's
Absolutely.
just not happening.
Mm.
Unless you have a name or you have won a tier 1 festival, there's your opportunity. And even then, it's a little rare. So we're dealing with a fairly substantial distributor, Freestyle Digital Media. They do a bunch of stuff. One of the properties they owned is shortlisted for like best feature animation this year.
Hmm.
And we, through a kind of a series of events, we, you know, have this kind of personal relationship with a few of them now that work there. And they've talked about like going to South by Southwest, going to Sundance and being like, look, here's what we can offer to you. And the expectation of the filmmaker to be like, whoa, where's my $5 million check? And they're like, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think it's an important thing for people to accept, I think, going into the process of feature filmmaking. And it's not a hopeless thing. There's just a new way of looking at filmmaking and film distribution that we just have to change the way we're thinking about it. And we can't expect to sell our movies for $1 million at a tier 1
Yeah.
festival, even if you get into a tier 1. And once again, Thunder Road, they had to self-distribute because they were like, no one would even offer us the budget of the film, and they won South by Southwest. Like grand jury prize at South by Southwest, and people were like, do you want like 200,000 for your film? Like that would be a wash for us. That's
Right.
what our film costs. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really knew what to do with that film. It's so good, but I don't think most people knew what to do with that film.
well, that's
I-
most people
so-
don't know what to do with well-made, independent, creative, different sort of movies that are not. They don't know.
They're not
They
stuck.
don't. They don't even trust themselves. Most of these people, especially studio executives, they don't even trust their own opinions. Like, they're like, well, is there a big name actor? Are there robots? Like, you know, it's like, how do I sell this? Like, they're just, that's all they can think. Like, and you don't have that. Then they're just like, well, no one will watch it then. And then all of a sudden something explodes that's like breaks all the rules because it's a good film, but they don't know what that is, you know? So, you know, it's your job to know what that is, you know?
So much of what we talked about, like what we've talked about so far, makes it feel like it's very hopeless almost to create film where in an age where I can grab my phone right now and I can be on 50,000 different things that I want to watch, right? And it might feel that way to a lot of people. And I would be lying if I didn't say there are definitely times throughout this process that it's felt like that for me. I think you should use that not as a means to say never mind, but a means to check yourself and go, am I passionate about this? Because I can promise you right now, if you're not in it because you love the art of it, it will destroy you. You have to. You have to. It's too challenging. It's too difficult unless you just know some people. If you have your buddy's uncle is an exec somewhere, right? Unless you have that attitude, it's gonna be a journey, and you got to be able to be in it for a long haul. You just can't go into it flippantly and say, well, cool, I'm going to take out this loan and make this movie and it'll be great. Well,
and then I'll be a millionaire and retire to my yacht in the Bahamas.
Right.
And never make movies again because I don't even like doing this.
Yeah. It's like, gosh.
There have been so many people that I've listened to that have done interviews that are like, after you get in with your first ones, if you make a second one, then you're really there. Like you've decided, you've made it through it and you go, okay, maybe I can do that again. Like, okay, great. That's where you know, like, sweet.
After our first film wrapped on production, Anne and I definitively stated we were never making a film again. And we believed it. We believed it. Our house was ripped to shreds. Our family felt like it was it was hanging by a thread. Like we thought we'd ruined everything. Our lives were like over, kind of a dramatic, thing. And then like, of course, you recover, you get some sleep, and the edit comes together and then it's bad. But then a few months later, it starts to come together and you're like, oh wow, it's actually it's really coming together. Like now that it's no longer 2 hours and 40 minutes long, it's good. It's actually pretty good. And then you start to go, we learned too much and we've come too far to not make another one. And we really do love it. It was just like you get, it's exactly what you said. Like that first film, like if you can get over, it can be. It was intense for us. I mean, we learned everything the hard way. I feel like we did not have any wisdom whatsoever in our first film.
For me, like that first one, when we wrapped production, it was rough because so the opening of the movie, there's a big pregnant belly. That's my wife who was pregnant with at the time with my son at the time. So the movie wrapped and it was less than 30 days later that we had a baby. And so, it was so much because it was the summer, we were traveling, we were 16 hours because we were living in Virginia Beach at the time. And so there was so much of this traveling back and forth that it was very much like oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into kind of thing. And I want to take the opportunity to really promote the idea of independent filmmakers setting some money aside, if you can, and if you know somebody, to hire an editor that you trust. And I want to tout Shauna Phillips, who is doing everything in the world in Georgia right now in so much post-production, but she was our editor. And there was so much of the film that she was able to pull out of the edit because I was so close to it, that she was able to look at, manipulate, look at it very objectively, and really kind of saved my sanity in the midst of that because I was able to trust somebody, hand it over. It didn't hurt that she's extremely talented, but that could shoulder some of that burden. So that way, I was still watching it every day, but I wasn't spending 8 to 10 hours on it every day. I was spending 2 hours a day.
Right.
And maybe a day off because she wants to mess with some stuff, or take the weekend off and I know that it's being worked on. So, independent filmmakers, that's an important thing. I know you're great editors. Everybody can edit, but if you can have just a little bit set aside to let somebody at least take a little bit of time with it, I think it'll make your film better, but it'll make your, hopefully mentality better.
Well, and I think that's the other thing, that we've kind of been skirting around with this is it's not just the director, it's not just the writer that has to have the passion to see a project through. It's the team that you build around yourself. There have been days, and Kyle could probably point them out on the calendar, he probably circled them, where I just did not have the enthusiasm to do a bunch of stuff. He would pester me with emails. But I do have that passion for this project. I wanted to see it through. But, I think that's the other thing we got to realize as independent filmmakers is we're going to have bad days. There are going to be days where you just do not want to do anything on your film. And you may be in the process of getting contracts and lined up for a distributor, or you may be working on the edit and knee deep in post. And you need that person that you can shoulder that for a while until you get back into that groove and you're back on your good days. And I think that's the other thing, is you need that core group, you need that team that can keep you motivated, keep pushing you. And when you have a bad day, they're not having a bad day, and so that responsibility can kind of shift. And that's the other important thing about doing this independently, is having that core group together. So, and we were lucky to be able to find that on A Place Called Home. So
That's so good to hear.
I don't even know how we met her, but we actually ended up working with a really good co-editor that Adam's familiar with.
I don't remember who was that again.
Started with a D.
Yeah, right on the
Danielle.
tip of the tongue.
Yeah, and Adam's wife. Is
Danielle
excellent.
Danielle literally saved us for all the reasons that you guys are expressing, which is like, I mean, it was even more than just like an off day. I mean, we were experiencing monumental family health crises and tragedies and all these things that were like, it was months long of literal shutdown. Like we could not put anything into it. And I remember just like at that point, just feeling this relief that like I couldn't even look at the film for a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time, because I was like a full-time dad and like people were in and out of hospital and whatnot. And like, and just knowing that like Danielle was working on it was like a huge relief that we were even progressing towards like an assembly cut, like I don't even know where we'd be at this point.
She really
without
helped.
her support.
So that's a really good word of advice. And we're short on time here, so I do want to just ask, what other words of warning or words of advice, or like what are the biggest takeaways, that you have after this experience of making your first film that you would want to impart with your wisdom?
Can I even reframe that question into two more direct questions?
Okay.
The first one is, what was your biggest mistake on this film, whether it was artistically or like managerially? And then what was like your best move, like the thing you did most right?
Those are all very good questions.
Either one. It's for both of you. It's a toss-up. Jump ball.
Creatively, there's something I've been wrestling with for a while, which would be changing the whole ending of the film. But
it works. It works.
It works. But I mean, I think, you eventually have to put it out there, and no one gets to go back. You don't get to then go, okay, I know you watched that version, but what about this? And what about that? Or, hey, get this cut. Eventually you got to do it. It will never be perfect, period. Eventually you got to do it. You got to push it out. You got to let it be seen.
And what happens if you do make it perfect is you get to George Lucas and he's like released like 7 versions of Star Wars, and you're like, you've ruined it.
Then email me, go to a place called homefilm.com and email me. And
yeah. Gosh, I don't know. I think, the greatest takeaway, again, this is more from a producing standpoint, and I know that this can be a bit of a struggle with independent films, but it's just every single scrap of paper that you put the name of the film on, or somebody signs or anything like that, make sure you have that hard copy somewhere easily accessible. Make sure also you digitize it and back it up on the cloud somewhere. So we had a stack of hard copies, signed releases that have just disappeared. We have no idea where they are. Luckily, we backed all those up and we have them digitally. But to this day, I've moved, Kyle's moved. We've gone through our entire houses. We didn't throw them away. They were marked important, but we've never been able to find them. So, I think that would be my key takeaway, is just from a producing standpoint, because as two people who have just gone through and gotten distribution, the distributor will ask. Anytime the name of your company or your film appears on paper in relation to that project, the distribution company is going to ask for that paperwork. So just make sure you keep track of it. Google Drive is phenomenal.
Thank you, Adam. You gave me time to think. I think
you're welcome.
I just thrown you out for the last 2 minutes.
No, I didn't. I 100% agree with him, because it really made me realize, I think the thing that we did wrong the most was post-production, was really having an understanding of what it takes and having enough of our budget set aside for post.
Amen,
Yeah.
brother.
Right.
Yeah.
You get so people get burned in post, and I don't feel like people understand when you're going through it. Like, you go through quality check, that costs something. Or you got E&O, that costs something. You've got your sound designer, you got your everything, right? So having some more of that set aside for post, and we set some aside for post, and it still wasn't enough. So it just really understanding what it takes to complete it, to actually get it finished. But the thing that we did right 100% was, again, that kind of brain trust. It was me and Adam and Nate and Aaron and some of Shelly when she was involved too, is we had multiple, and I mean every day or every other day, 4 to 5 hour pre-production conversations. When we got on set, we only had 2 days go to 12. We shot for 24. We had 4 days go over 10. Everything else was 10 and under, which is like not a normal independent feature film production, especially because we had, a sizable amount of cast and crew for ours.
So the audience knows, we have a 2-hour feature. This is not a short 90-minute comedy. This is a 2-hour feature. And we did not do excessively long days. Also because all of us most of us had families too. And, we were respectful of that as well.
But we had so much scheduled and so much planned out that it made, Hitchcock talks about, going on to production is like going on vacation, because he has everything listed in his binder, right? We had so many things planned out that it really did, looking back on even now, and there's so many things, little things that as a director, I'm like, man, I wish I would have done this. Man, I wish I would have done that. But it was smooth. It was smooth because we took the time in pre-production. Once we found out we were going to have a budget, we were still in pre-production for 6 months. That's 6 months dedicated, figure out how the heck we're going to do this and be effective at what we're doing so that we're not burning every person alive on our set.
That's huge. Yeah. Did you?
You made a very different movie from us.
Every experience is unique and different.
Yeah.
So
Wish we'd heard that one before. No, that's excellent. That's good to hear that that's possible to have that experience and have it go smoothly with all that preparation. I think that, it really is hopeful for a first film can be that way. It is possible.
Absolutely.
With enough preparation. And did you guys pay yourselves for that time, or was that just spare time that you were putting in still?
Yeah, I mean, that's, the joy and the heartache of independent production is a lot of that pre-pro time, is just time that you're putting into the project. But I think both of us would say, if we had not put in that time, the quality of the project that we got out would not be there. Yeah. And so, which again gets back to being passionate about this project. You need to be passionate enough to be able to invest yourself in pre-pro so that you can raise the quality of the eventual project that you get out of it. And, we were able to do that. We made our days. I remember on one day on set, I think we were like wrapping up sub 8 hours on set. And I went to Kyle and I was like, do you want to do? It's like, we got through the list of everything we were supposed to do that day. And we had done such an amazing job planning that there was literally nothing else that we could sub in. There were no other locations that we could go to, not because of a failure of scheduling or planning or anything like that. We didn't have actors on set to be able to do some stuff because, again, we had scheduled out our days so well. And we were like, let's just call it a day, go home. We did our jobs. We got everything done that we needed to get done and that we could get done. And I had even pulled some things from other days to get us up to the amount of time that we had spent on that day. So it is possible. It is possible.
You guys are so respectful. I feel like if I was in that situation, I would have been like, hold on, I'm writing another scene. I'm almost done.
But, I brought it up early. It is a marathon. And we went into that knowing it. So even when we got on set, we go, okay, great, this is the first day. But by day 10, people are going to be exhausted. So every little thing that we can find to give people a break, and just know that if I call in all my favors right now, I'm probably not going to get what I need later.
Yeah.
But it is possible.
And it did kind of work out that short day, the crew was starting to feel it a little bit. And so they really did appreciate that
It was
shorter
like
day.
right in the middle.
Yeah,
like
it was right in the
smack
middle of the day, or middle of the shooting schedule.
Yeah.
And so they really enjoyed those extra couple of hours off that evening. And the next day was going to be an intense day anyway that we had planned. And they knocked it out of the park. And I think, part of that was because they got a couple extra hours off the night before.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that is really awesome. And just to wrap up, I'd love to hear just a little bit of like what's next, what's on the horizon, and then how can we support you moving forward with the film and with what you have next in your careers. I just think you guys are doing great work, and was so impressed with this. Is a really good first film and really worth the watch. So everyone listening, go rent it, go check it out, and it's really worth it. So yeah, how do we support you? Or
what's next? What's next for both of you?
Yeah.
What's next for me is I will probably be working on a documentary with my university. So we are working on we have some grants out for some federal dollars. Yay, working for a university, you can go and do those things. So hopefully we will be hearing back from that real shortly, and that'll be the next thing on my plate. It's about a local figure here in Columbus that, again, kind of a very unique Southern story, and I'm excited to share that. Maybe I can come back on later and talk to you guys more about that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and you'll have a baby, so it'll be a totally new conversation too after that.
I'm excited about sleep. That's what's next for me, is some sleep. Now, there's a couple things that I'm working on. There's some things that I'm working on with Adam, but nothing official that's yet. I'm on a writing team for another project that's getting pitched pretty soon. The idea was to make this one, and then hopefully the next one is a step up as far as budget, as far as things are concerned, and that just means it takes more time. I'm writing a bunch. There's a project that Adam, myself, and some other people are working on to try to get off the ground, which hopefully will happen soon. Which would be
we have
another
a distribution deal now, so
yeah, that's right. Another narrative feature of kind of a bigger caliber. And then there's a couple writing teams that I'm a part of that are pitching things soon. So that's really exciting. As far as supporting the film, obviously watching it, renting it, reviewing it, that's a huge benefit for us.
Yes, please review the film. Don't just watch it, but
It makes it really hard.
Yeah. Please review it.
Unless you didn't like it.
Well, no,
Don't
honestly,
review it.
even if you didn't like it, go ahead and do a review, just because it helps with the algorithms. And hey, I mean, this is the game we all have to play. And those reviews really do help. And, that would be a cool resource for you guys, maybe, is to put together a list of, films that everyone can go and watch and review, and we can just have a big review circle fest or something.
Yeah.
So,
We'll have
we'll
have an online film festival where the only cost of admission is that you have to review every film you watch.
there you go.
Or don't watch in the festival.
Interesting idea. I like it.
Yeah.
But you can everything about the film, if you just go to a place called home film.com, that'll connect to all the social, all the press, all the ways to buy, review, all the festivals, all of our behind the scenes. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us.
Okay, happy to. Yeah, it's definitely not a hard ask to go take a little time, write a little review, In
exchange for watching a really cool film.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on the podcast.
Okay.
Thanks, you guys. Have a good night. We'll see you later.
Yeah. See you guys.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, you'll love the Feature Filmmaker Academy, a program designed to teach anyone how to finance and finish a feature film.
There are many resources teaching you how to do a great job, but what they don't teach you is how to get the job in the first place.
You cannot have a career making feature films until you've made at least one. Anyone can make a feature film using our proven model.
It's risk-free. If you follow all the steps in the program, you'll finance and finish a feature film, or we'll give you your money back.
Learn more at invisiblemansion.com/feature filmmaker or click the link in the show notes.
If you find this free resource valuable, we'd really appreciate it if you leave us a review or share it with another filmmaker. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.